After the release of Ace Combat 5, the Project Aces team quickly got to work on making their new follow-up, but things would be a little extra interesting this time. Looking forward to the next generation of consoles that the game would inevitably release on, not only was the Xbox 360 seeming like it would be more powerful than the PlayStation 3 in terms of hardware, but it would also be releasing a year earlier. Seeing this, and according to one producer in an interview, feeling like fans had been waiting for a long time for a proper sequel, the team ultimately decided that the game would be released as an Xbox 360 exclusive. But because of Ace Combat's history as a PlayStation franchise, few fans even had an Xbox 360 to play the game on, leading to it becoming the worst-selling console game in the history of the franchise. Because of this, there are a ton of Ace Combat fans even today who have still never played this game, and it's definitely one of the least discussed entries in the franchise as well. So, is Ace Combat 6 Fires of Liberation a worthy successor to what came before, or is it a forgettable sequel that fans are better off leaving in the past? Well, let's talk about it. And before getting too far into the video, I should mention that this is the 9th in a series of videos where I'm playing every Ace Combat game for the first time and reviewing them as I go along. And while you don't have to have seen the rest of the videos in order to enjoy this one, you will be missing a lot of important context about my journey with the series if you haven't seen them. So I'll have the full playlist linked in the description below for those of you that want to go check those out first. But with that out of the way, Armored Core 6 Fires of Ace Combat 6 Fires of Liberation is an arcade-style combat flight simulation game developed by Project Aces and published by Namco Bandai Games for the Xbox 360 in 2007. And right when you start up the game, you'll notice how story-heavy it is, with the game immediately serving you with in-engine cutscenes, which are a first for the franchise. And while the Xbox 360 certainly had way more horsepower than any system Ace Combat had been on before, these cutscenes really aren't presented as well as the series' pre-rendered cutscenes of the past. The power to render higher fidelity visuals was there, but the character models in this game just feel kind of off. I mean, just look at these creepy-ass kids. But in this introduction, we're introduced to the country of Ameria and its culture, the nation we'll end up fighting for in this game, before we see a mother sending her daughter off to a field trip for the day, just moments before the city is attacked by unknown enemy forces. This leads straight into the opening mission, where we step into the shoes of Ace Pilot Talisman to defend our city from this invasion. And with this opening, Project Aces is clearly flexing what they can do with the new hardware, with this being the largest scale battle in the entire franchise up to this point, and looking pretty damn good on top of that. In terms of visuals, this game can suffer from the typical 7th gen problem of having very dull colors, but a lot of the time it's a super pretty game overall, and the plane models here are genuinely beautiful. Like most of the Ace Combat games, if you compare this to other games that released the same year on the same hardware, you'll see that Ace Combat's overall picture looks leagues ahead of the rest, but now with the new generational jump, this also just looks light years ahead of any previous entries in the series. But as powerful as the Xbox 360 was for its time, it wasn't powerful enough to have these impressive visuals without any trade-offs. The big trade-off here is that the game is locked to 30 frames per second rather than the much smoother 60 FPS that was used in the PS2 trilogy. It's something that I was a little put off by, but much like I said in the Ace Combat X video, after you've played like 30 minutes, you start to not even notice it. But in this first mission, we get introduced to things like the new controls, with the bumpers and triggers being swapped so that the triggers are your afterburners and brakes, and the bumpers will now adjust your yaw. As well as that, we get introduced to our new wingman Shamrock, who in my opinion is one of the best the series has to offer, being up there with Chopper from AC5 and Pixie from Zero for me. And something that shocked me during my first few minutes with the game is just how powerful the weapons in this game are. Your missiles will one-shot most enemy aircraft and ground units in this game, and your machine guns will melt through planes in less than a second. This really gives Ace Combat 6 more of a power fantasy feel, but I'm not sure if I'm 100% on board with this. While it's really fun to shoot down other planes with a single missile, it can lead to the game feeling a bit like a mundane shooting gallery at times. It's definitely worse in some missions than others, which is something that we'll come back to in a bit, but it's certainly something that can lead to the game feeling a bit tedious to play through at times. However, when you get caught up in those really exciting set pieces and you're packing that level of firepower, it can be really genuinely fun, so I'm not really sure how I feel about it overall. And to add to the power fantasy, there's this new sound that plays when you fly through shrapnel, and it just adds to that Hollywood action movie feel that I've come to love about the franchise. But at the end of this first battle, we eventually find out that the enemies attacking us are fighters from the country of Slovakia before we're introduced to our first super weapon and attacked by dozens of ace pilots all at once, forcing us to retreat and give up our country to the enemy. And this gives us the main objective for the remainder of the game's campaign: liberate the country of Ameria from the Slovakians. From here we get some more cutscenes, and we get to see the general direction the game's story is going in. The majority of these cutscenes follow the story of a civilian woman whose daughter went missing during the attack and whose husband was a pilot who was shot down and killed during it as well. Through this woman, Project Aces explores the impact of these sorts of hostile invasions on the civilians of the nations affected, and it's some fairly interesting stuff, even though I feel like her story is the one that I was the most disappointed by. On the other hand, we also follow a high-ranking general of Slovakia who is called into America after they first take over, allowing us to see things from the enemy's point of view, and while I'm not going to dig too far into it in this video, I feel that his story is by far the highlight of AC6's narrative. And now, here's something that I get to say for the first time in the entire Ace Combat review series: the UI design and menu layout in this game is incredibly clean. They look good, there's little to no confusion, and everything is placed exactly where you would expect it to be, meaning that navigating these menus feels super smooth and natural, especially when compared to some of the worst entries in this series. If I had one nitpick about the menus in this game, it would be that for whatever reason, the plane statistics have once again reverted to using this little pentagon chart from way back in Air Combat, and I definitely don't feel like these display the info as well as just giving players the numbers behind the stats like they did in AC5 and 0. Getting into the second mission and beyond though, we start to get introduced to the new systems and mechanics of Ace Combat 6. The first of these is the ESM, or Electronic Support Measure System. This is a new addition where during missions, some allied units will be emitting signals that will enhance your missile tracking as well as how quickly your weapons will reload after use. On paper, this encourages players to work more with their allies, especially since AC6 has the weakest missile tracking in the series up to this point. And the really fun twist here is that enemies will use the ESM system as well, meaning that if you don't prioritize certain units, you'll have to deal with the enemies having buffed missile tracking during your missions. I think this system is really fun in theory, but after the first couple missions of the system being introduced, I found myself essentially ignoring it outside of destroying enemy units that were buffing them. I'm not really sure how you could make engaging with this system more worthwhile outside of just increasing something ridiculous like missile damage, but it would definitely be nice to see it brought back in some more meaningful way. And landings in this game have also been fleshed out more. As we'll talk about in a little bit, there are some instances in Ace Combat 6 where you'll have an allied base in the middle of a battlefield, and they've actually made it so that you can now take the risk of landing at these bases mid-battle for a quick resupply and repair. To do this, you simply need to fly towards one of these bases at low altitude and click in the left thumbstick to deploy your landing gear and initiate the landing sequence. Players do need to be careful about when they do this, however, as enemies can still shoot you while you're landing, and you'll be incredibly vulnerable while doing so due to the low speeds. And along with that, the return line from Ace Combat 4 has returned once again, something that returning viewers of the series will already know that I was a big fan of. However, one complaint of mine with this game that's very noticeable during the landings is that some of the extra effects that were used in the PS2 trilogy to add more weight to the game's flight are absent here. I'm not sure if this is a stylistic choice or if it was done to ensure a more stable frame rate, but it felt kind of weird to not have any screen shake when slamming on the brakes or landing at an airport, and I'm sure many longtime Ace Combat fans also noticed their absence when first playing the game. And while it's not a new thing, the team did bring back the ability to select Shamrock's plane and special weapons before every mission after the feature was absent in Ace Combat 0. In my opinion, being able to choose a jet for your wingman not only allows you to be better equipped for missions, but it can also just add a fun cosmetic appeal when seeing the two of you flying together in the mid-mission cutscenes. So of course, I'm super happy to see this brought back, as I kind of just figured that it was going to be gone for good. However, this game has a bit of a problem when it comes to unlocking and using different planes. You don't get to use any aircraft beyond the starter F-16C until after Mission 4, something that was handled the exact same way in Ace Combat 5. The thing is though, in AC5, it was ultimately a non-issue since there were 28 missions in the campaign, so you still had plenty of time to play around with the various planes in a single front-to-back playthrough. In AC6 though, the campaign is only 15 missions long, so you spend almost a third of the game's total runtime locked behind the starter plane. I have no issue with the team wanting players to stick to the starter plane for a few missions so that they can learn the rest of the game before worrying about choosing the right tool for the job and whatnot, but doing so for almost a third of the game is pretty extreme, and they definitely could have just done this for the first 2 or 3 missions and achieved the same result with less frustration. And I know that some people will say that the Ace Combat games are built around replayability, and you're not wrong, but the thing you have to realize is that the majority of players will only do one playthrough if they even manage to finish that, and when evaluating a game's design, I try to look more at the average player's experience rather than that of diehard fans of the series. But probably the largest addition made to Ace Combat 6's gameplay is the operations system. In AC6, almost every mission will have multiple operations, which are essentially sub-objectives within the battle that you're fighting in, and you'll be able to move around the map and help complete each of these as you please. Each of these operations will have allied squadrons that will carry them out automatically, but without any additional support from the player, it's more than likely that those allies will fail on their own, and if half of the objectives in a mission fail, you'll fail the mission in its entirety. Beyond this, once an operation is complete, the allies that were working on it will now be free to support you elsewhere in the mission, with players being able to call in support from these allies at any time using the D-pad. And as I alluded towards earlier, the operations system also allows you to capture bases in the middle of the battlefield, allowing you to land there and resupply at them. This is a really fun system, and it really adds to the feeling of scale that Project Aces was clearly going for in this game. And speaking of the scale of missions in this game, planes carry a ludicrous amount of ammunition here. This is obviously done to make up for the fact that these missions are really long, which we'll come back to in a second, but we're talking ridiculous amounts of ammo. I mean, look at this, the F-22 carries 250 missiles in this game. I feel like this is a bit of an over-adjustment, especially with the return line coming back, as well as those bases that you can resupply at in the middle of the battlefield. Players have the most options to resupply mid-mission that they've ever had in this game, and while they definitely still could have increased the ammo a little bit to maintain the pacing during the missions, 250 missiles is such an insane amount to give to players, especially in the game where almost every enemy unit is destroyed with just one. And when I say that the missions in this game are long, I mean that they are long. The average mission in this game took me about 30 to 40 minutes to complete, and some of them even give players a time limit of up to 50 or 60 minutes. So it's not an issue of me just taking a really long time, they're just actually made to be that long. And long missions aren't a bad thing by any means, but the issue is that most of the missions in this game just don't do enough to keep themselves interesting for that long, and they tend to just become 30+ minute shooting galleries. But when interesting things do happen is when Ace Combat 6 really hits its stride. Like at the end of Mission 7, where the missile barrage superweapon from the opening mission returns, but this time with a small army of unmanned drones along with it. The Estevakians are using these drones to act as waypoints for the missiles, allowing them to more accurately target you and your allies. This leads to an encounter where you have to destroy all of these drones while avoiding the massive explosions from the missiles, which also means that you can't get too close to any of the drones because of the risk that a missile might be flying towards them at any moment. And you combine that with just the sheer number and scale of the battle itself, and this becomes an all-out shit show as soon as it starts. Other than the small handful of missions like this though, the mission variety is pretty poor in this game. I would say that more than half of your time spent playing AC6 will be made up of just simple air-to-ground missions that go on for way longer than they have any reason to. And it's a real shame too, because like I said, when Ace Combat 6 is doing unique and interesting things, it really does have some of the best gameplay in the series up to this point, but these moments of brilliance only make up a small portion of the total experience. And as much as I enjoy the premise behind the story in this game, the writing can be pretty all over the place. There's a handful of scenes in this game that are really well written and acted, but then there's the scenes that are like this.
Just then, Something roars in the sky above.
Hey, look! What's going on?
I know it's our only chance of escape.
Get in! Hurry!
Fire! Damn!
On the battlefield, you have to put luck aside and take what you get, good or bad.
And there's also this bit near the end of a mission halfway through the game where you're attacked by enemy fighters, and instead of retreating like Command says, Talisman and Shamrock instead engage the fighters and shoot them down. Command suspends them over this, but then without even a cutscene to transition from that to the next mission, we're suddenly thrown into a briefing where they say that they have a highly dangerous mission that only the two of you can handle, so your suspension is just lifted. I mean, come on guys, if you're gonna lift the suspension immediately afterwards with no consequences, there's no point in having it in the story at all. But circling back to mission variety real quick, this game does bring back one of my favorite mission types out of the Ace Combat series, and that's the Flying Fortress battle. Instead, this time, it's an entire fleet of flying fortresses, complete with Ace pilots taking off from the runways on them and trying to prevent you from shooting them down. As well as that, it turns out that the fortress at the center of it is actually the super weapon that's been sending out those missile barrages throughout the entire game, making this a super weapon battle on top of everything else. It's easily one of the coolest missions in the series so far, and like I said earlier, during these moments, Ace Combat 6 really does have some of the best gameplay in the series. And speaking of the aces in this mission, I know that I literally just said that Ace Combat X has the best pilot AI in the franchise in the last video, but I was wrong because AC6 has even better pilots. Much like what I praised in that video, they're evasive when they should be, aggressive when they should be, and the scale of the battles in this game only adds to the intensity. Now, also factor in that this game has some of the weakest missile tracking in the series, along with the most powerful weapons we've ever seen, and you easily have some of the most intense dogfights in the franchise. And something smaller that I noticed about this game while playing through it is that the planes you unlock would often be relevant to the mission you were about to take on. By this, I mean that if the next mission was a pure air-to-ground battle, chances are that you'll unlock an attacker plane beforehand. If it's going to be purely air-to-air, you'll unlock a fighter, and of course, if the next mission is a combination of both, you'll very likely unlock a new multi-role plane. This is actually really nice, as almost every single time I unlocked a new plane, I also had the perfect excuse to take it out for a spin right away, and I honestly really hope that the rest of the series going forward continues to do this. But near the end of the game, we managed to retake our city from the opening mission in one final climactic battle. At least, that's what you think is happening during the mission, because afterwards you get another mission where you patrol the skies above the city during the celebration, before a barrage of cruise missiles and fighters come in out of nowhere. And during this battle, Shamrock explains to us that this is going to be his last mission because he found out after we liberated the city that his wife and daughter were both killed during the initial attack. We managed to defend the city, and afterwards we find out that they were launched from across the sea, so we get one final mission where we go to destroy the weapons Estivakia is using to try to destroy the city. When we get there though, we're met with a giant railgun as well as the remainder of Estivakia's ace pilots, and here we get the real climax of the game. We spend a while dogfighting and wiping out the defenses on the railgun before Command tells us that we'll likely only be able to destroy the thing from inside, but they have no data on any weak points that we might be able to target. Hearing this, Shamrock figures that since he has no remaining family and he's done flying after this anyway, that he'll fly in and try to get us a scan. So against Command's wishes, he flies straight into the thing blindly at full speed and gets us the scan, but he also ends up getting shot down after narrowly making it out. We use the scan data to fly in and destroy it, and with that, the war between Ameria and Estivakia is over. We get a really nice ending to the game where we get to see the various subplots of the game get wrapped up, including the fact that Shamrock actually survived his crash, but due to his injuries, he'll never be able to fly again. However, we do get to see him settling back into civilian life and finding his reason to carry on even without his family or his wings. We see that life in Ameria is slowly getting back to normal thanks to our actions throughout the campaign, and then the credits roll. Overall, I was very surprised by Ace Combat 6. I hadn't heard much about this game, and what I had heard was that it was fine, but that it was nothing to really write home about. But having played it for myself now, I can say that when this game really gets going, it's easily up there with the best of the franchise, but most of the time it's being held back by a small handful of crippling problems. As much as I would love to say that this game stands alongside the PS2 trilogy in terms of quality, the mission variety and the missions just generally outstaying their welcome can really make this game a chore to play at times, and of all the issues for an Ace Combat game to have, these are pretty high up on the list of the worst possible ones. If you're a massive Ace Combat fan who hasn't played this game, and you happen to own a system that's capable of doing so, I definitely recommend that you check it out sometime. I went on eBay and got a complete in-case copy of the game in perfect condition, and it cost me a little under $30. So if you've got an Xbox laying around and you enjoy the other games in the series, this is a pretty easy sell for you. So at the end of the day, I'm going to give Ace Combat 6 Fires of Liberation an 8 out of 10. Hey guys, thanks for swinging by. I've been enjoying the hell out of producing this series, and interacting with you guys has made it more than worth the effort. If you're into full series retrospectives like this, feel free to check out the playlists on screen. And if you like what you see, maybe check out my Patreon page to help keep this channel alive and kicking. Anyway, thanks guys, and I'll hope to see all of you again right here for the next Ace Combat review.